This presentation is an example of wildlife surveillance with a specific look at lead poisoning in keas. And while this isn't a disease as such, it is an issue that keas do come up against quite frequently and needs to be examined as part of our conservation efforts towards kea. Wildlife surveillance is an important tool in conservation as it monitors trends across whole populations to look at reproduction success or failure, reasons for sudden population declines, or even great successes. It provides conservationist groups with data on the growth and decline of their population of interest. It can measure the success of their efforts and allowing plans to be changed for the better if it doesn't seem to be working, or can implement successful methods into their other conservation plans. It also allows for early detection in the disease outbreaks in a population, and it allows for investigation into the causes of these. It can also protect New Zealand's economy in regards to livestock, our domestic animals, and also the native wildlife and our care by identifying early sources of infection and prevent transmission and potential zoonotic diseases. An example of wildlife surveillance is undertaken on our native kea, an endemic form of parrot that is unique in that it is the only alpine parrot, known as a clown of the mountains by tourists and a guardian of the mountains by the Waitahi Māori. It's a highly social and intelligent parrot, and they're very curious about new things, often leading them to danger when they interact with human habitation and settlements, as they can ingest things that ideally they shouldn't while they're investigating these items. Juveniles are often gathered in flocks, and they learn new behaviours from each other and also from older kea, which is both good and also bad, is that it can lead them into ingesting things that they shouldn't by learning from the example of others. They are at risk of consuming toxins due to their lifestyle and where they contact people, and due to the curiosity as well. The surveillance of kea is undertaken by the Kea Conservation Trust in partnership with the Department of Conservation. They do yearly surveys, mostly in January, to assess the reproductive and survival rates. And while they're doing the surveys, they'll often examine the nests and to capture and release of kea, attaching transmitters for close monitoring in the future and to understanding nesting behaviours and flight patterns. And while they have them, they will also take some biodata on general health, and blood samples are collected as well to assess their lead levels, which is one of the things they watch for in their wild kea. High lead levels often indicate that there is an easy source of lead available to these kea, and therefore an investigation is required and potential for a plan to remove or mitigate this source of lead. Lead toxicity in kea is usually caused by ingestion, and they can do this through environmental sources of their own food and when scavenging as they do, and their water resources. And this is called chronic toxicity. It's just a slow build-up. Man-made structures such as roof flashing, nail heads, rubbish dumps, lead paint in buildings built before 1990 often induce acute toxicity when they take in large quantities of lead at one time. Lead has a sweet flavour and it is attractive to kea, so they often come back to it again and again. The problem with lead toxicity is that it attaches to the red blood cells and is transported quickly through the bloodstream, deposited in tissues. So it affects the hemoglobin production in red blood cells, which will lead to anemia. It can be deposited in bones in periods of rapid bone deposition and later released, causing toxicity and clinical signs there. It's mistaken for calcium by the body and therefore can pass through the blood-brain barrier and disrupt the central nervous system, interfering with usual function and causes seizures. It also destroys cells required for motor neurons, causing demyelination, and will disrupt the peripheral nervous system. You often see this in ataxia, poor balance, and often paralysis as well. It alters the production of T cells and white blood cells, which reduces the immune reactions, leaving birds vulnerable to parasite and other diseases. So clinical signs seen in these birds are ataxia, poor balance. They often have a dull mentation and quite listless. The feathers might be sort of broken and worn or matted in appearance and might be quite ruffled. Paresis or paralysis of the feet and wings, that's relating to the demyelination. They have a poor body score, they're often unable to feed themselves, or the gastrointestinal tract is shut down, they'll be quite malnourished and potentially have crop stasis. They may see wounds, they'll be less able to avoid predators, or even just poor mobility might have caused the appearance of wounds. Quite prone to parasites, you see quite a few external parasites on them. Anorexic, again relating to poor gut motility and crop stasis, and dehydration is quite a large factor as well. Diagnosing of lead toxicity is undertaken via a distance and a physical examination, which will show you the signs previously mentioned, and also a blood test which accurately measures the lead levels in plasma, allowing a definitive diagnosis of lead toxicity. The hematology, if run, will show regenerative anemia, and a blood biochemistry will show evidence of kidney injury or dysfunction, as lead will often create protein complexes that can damage the kidneys during elimination. Radiographs as well will also often show the presence of heavy metal in the stomach or crop, and this is important to note as it may need to be surgically removed at a later date to prevent further toxicity occurring. Treatment of lead toxicity is done by chelation, which is a binding of lead in the bloodstream into an inert compound that is then safely eliminated. This is done either by injectable calcium EDTA, usually over the first few days when the gastrointestinal system is not up to scratch, or oral DMSA once they're able to digest food. It's also important to stabilize seizures on admission, treat the dehydration with intravenous or intraosseous fluid therapy, and treat malnutrition. Often crop feeding with Harrison's recovery diet. Might be important as well to evacuate the stomach contents of any heavy metals that might be there, and this is done through a fibrous diet, lactulose, or even surgical removal. Secondary infections may be present, and so they just need to be treated at the discretion of the vet, and cleaning and dressing wounds and applying a antiparasitic treatment as well. Prognosis is often poor, and they can be able to recover in some cases, but not be able to release back to the wild due to the effects of toxicity on the peripheral, motor, and central nervous system. While nursing a kea in hospital, it's important to note it is a parrot, so it has quite a sharp, strong beak and also strong legs. And when you're handling them, it's good to have a towel, so place the towel over them and control the head, and then wrap the towel underneath the body to keep the wings and legs under control. It's best to do this quite quickly and carefully, and always avoid stressing the patient. So when hospitalized, you need to have a quiet, cool, dark and well ventilated cage. Keep in mind it is an alpine bird, so they're not used to high temperatures and should be kept cool, not too hot. You can also provide a bird bath once they're more recovered, as they do like to, in warmer temperatures, have a bit of a bathe. Monitoring for signs of stress as well, especially when handling. A kea is likely to become quite vocal, struggle, and may even have increased respirations and overheat if they're stressed. If you notice signs of this, all handling needs to stop, so place the bird back in its cage, let it calm down and recover, keep monitoring and make sure those signs of stress dissipate. It may cause collapse if it becomes too severe, so this should always be kept in mind when handling. Procedures can always be continued later when the bird is in a better frame. They are immunocompromised as well with the lead toxicity, so it needs to be a very clean environment that they're kept in. Any equipment or personnel who come into contact with the bird need to be nice and clean, no contact with other birds or potential forms of transmission of vectors of disease transmission as well. It's also important when you're crop feeding, which does need to happen, that you watch out for regurgitation. So keep an eye down the back of the throat. You'll need an assistant to help, so they'll hold the bird and keep the neck straight while you place a crop tube down the left side of the throat. Make sure you feel for 2 tubes to ensure it hasn't gone down the trachea instead of into the crop. When you're feeding, just make sure that there's no fluid build-up in the back of the throat. If you see the signs of regurgitation, take the crop tube out immediately and just release the bird's head. It can shake the fluid out itself. It does know how to care for itself in cases of regurgitation, but it is dangerous to their health if you continue with what you're doing. So while a kea is in hospital, it is important to keep in mind that they are highly intelligent birds. They require a lot of enrichment, so providing them social interaction, lots of food foraging activities, so hunting for grubs and things, and lots of different types of perching, things of interest to them. They can make puzzles for them to work out, and you need to just rotate the items in the cage daily. Is important in all concerns of nursing that mental and intellectual health is cared for, as well as just the physical. It is important to note that they are alpine birds again, so cool temperatures and providing basins for them to bathe in if it gets too warm. Their diet is omnivorous and opportunistic, so they will spend a lot of time foraging for grubs, birds. They eat other nestlings to show a bit of hunting behaviour. They have nuts, seeds, fruits, tubers, and also scavenging of deceased tar and deer and other things, so hence their contact with human hunters there. So when you are feeding them or considering a diet in hospital, once they are eating on their own, it is good to provide a wide range of foods for them, so you can cover all these bases when you're offering them food, and it also keeps their interest alive as well. It's important to have a good cage, so it should be big enough for a full range of full of wing expansion, moving around and moving from perch to perch. Obviously in a hospital environment you don't want to have full movement from swinging from one place to the other, but you do need to have them showing natural motility. It helps keep muscles from atrophying as well. Because they nest on the ground, it's good to have a nesting box, particularly important for the female patients, as they this provides a bit of security for them, and all straw and hay that might be used for a nesting box must be checked for aspergillosis spores, as this can be quite harmful to the birds as well and has caused death. Lead removal in the environment is actually a bit of a difficult process. So there's obvious sources of lead, such as in the old dock huts, and ongoing maintenance and repairs of these have been slowly removing sources of lead from them, and the flashings and the lead nails that were used to be used and have been replaced with safer, non-toxic building materials instead. And lead levels in samples taken from kea have reduced in the more outback regions since this has taken place. There are still sources of lead, especially in the human settlements that overlap with kea habitats, and blood levels are still quite high in these areas, as you can see in our graph over here. So this is the lead levels from kea taken in Arthur's Pass over the last few years, and they're still quite high in those caught. Most of them caught have high levels over 20 milligrams, and then you've got lesser amounts of kea caught with mid to low levels of lead in their blood. Ongoing investigations occur every time they do these surveys if they find that there's quite large amounts of lead, so investigate into their sources, and there are community groups that in partnership with the Kea Conservation Trust that make efforts towards removing sources of lead from the environment around, so they do require a bit of funding, but they are making efforts into trying to keep lead out of kea environments. All sick and injured wildlife need to be reported to DOC through their hotline, and if any injured birds are reported to the veterinary clinic, they can either be brought in for veterinary assessment, or they can contact the Kea Conservation Trust, which will often take charge of organising care and transport to a veterinary facility that can specialise in the caring for kea. If more than 3 deceased animals are seen, and the wild animals are seen, then the Ministry of Primary Industries need to be contacted so that they can investigate causes of death, and all dead kea need to be reported to DOC so that a post-mortem can be carried out on them at the wild-based pathology facility, and they also keep records of deceased animals so that cause of death can be used for future research and data collection. In conclusion, it's important to have wildlife surveillance and keeping our native populations healthy and assisting in conservation efforts. It gives us early warning signs of an outbreak of disease and helps protect our economy, domestic animals and wild livestock as well by preventing disease transmission or infection or illness through vectors or environmental contamination. It allows us to investigate these causes early and mitigate the effects before they happen. For Kia, which is an intelligent and curious alpine parrot, leg toxicity caused by human presence in their habitats is a specific concern, as they do enjoy the taste of lead and they will often come back to those sources time and again. It's quite bad for their health, and it can cause a serious effect on the population, considering the small population size and small reproductivity success that they have. And just remember that all sick and injured care need to be reported to DOC so that investigations can occur and to sources of lead, and help communities remove those from the environment. So these are the references that I used in researching this subject, and in particular Department of Conservation and the Kia Conservation Trust have quite a lot of information on their websites, so have a good explore of those. There's more than just there's a health and wildlife and husbandry caring page, especially in relation to handling wildlife and the things you need to do to look after a Kia. So there's a little bit more in-depth research that can be taken through these conservation sites, and they're quite useful in giving information on how to get involved in the community and looking after Kia out there and any other species that you might be interested in as well. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I hope it's informative. I'm happy to answer any further questions if you need to email me, and thank you very much for your time. Cheers.